Hello, everyone. Welcome to AI Insights, the executive brief, where we explore how AI is shaping businesses with industry leaders and experts. I'm your host, Benjamin Bowman. Today, we have Garrick Villaume, an independent technical consultant and fractional CTO who specializes in executive strategic planning and hands-on technical development. Excited to have you. Hope you enjoy.
I'm Garrick Villaume. I work as an independent technical consultant in largely an executive strategic planning capacity, although I get my hands plenty dirty doing detailed technical work where and when necessary, which is more often than not right now working with fairly early ventures, that are trying to develop either their MVP or grow their product market fit value proposition.
Yeah. So, Garrick, thanks for joining me. I'm super excited to have you. I've been thinking about this for a week now, and I know we had a previous conversation last week. You are dealing with, technology across across the ecosystem. So you're not focused on one specific technology, but you're really trying to focus on companies and helping companies grow their technology, understand how the technology fits, how it adapts, how it works together. But go ahead and expand a little bit more on, like, when you're going in, you're consulting, and we've even used like a fractional CTO or CTO as a service. When you're providing your service, what's that focus? What does that look like? What's your approach?
So the current engagement model is long baseline extended engagement. So these are not drop-in or episodic engagements or interactions that happen in small hourly chunks and then maybe recur a few times a month. These are more or less, in the one case, very much a day-to-day activity where I'm actually doing the engineering infrastructure work to bring the product back. Right? All of the technology and the IP was packaged and prepared for sale. The people I'm working with were the ones who acquired that IP, and we're now unpackaging that and working to bring the engineering functions back so that the product can be refreshed. Components have changed. Some things have changed that would be needed to be integrated into a new design that would then have to go through the standard qualification process for that product set, which is a solar photovoltaic system. Okay. The other one is laying sort of foundational planning work and parameter space for developing carbon capture technologies that are aimed at long-term viability with regard to complex technical capabilities for capturing carbon and dealing with it. That is an area that I am not personally technically steeped in, but I did a great deal of research and analysis in the domain from about a year ago to 18 months prior to that. I got involved and then was able to parse and process some of the techno-economic analyses they're called for various technologies and platform designs in that space, and then thereby help point the direction towards a viable path for this very early venture.
Nice. I love that. I love that approach. It's you go wide with that approach. It's not just you're not looking through a shortened lens or through blinders at all. Like, to have that approach and really go that deep into different type of technologies and different businesses and help that expansion is amazing. So let's jump into AI here. I mean, the conversation we're having around that, and you had an interesting take. I was watching a video of you that you had online, and you were discussing this trust that everyone has in this AI system right now, right? And everyone's jumping in with this huge amount of trust. And technically, we're really within a framework of AI. We're not really at full AI right now, but the buzz is just amazing. I mean, it's off the chart, and I don't even say that completely in a good way either. So what are you seeing with the AI, and what's that perception you were talking about?
Let me preface my answer by saying AI, qua AI, is not my sole or specific focus.
Sure.
Probably not even maybe the bullseye of my focus.
Mhm.
My focus is the broader topic of technology and how it's being applied to drive greater, broader, more equitable prosperity.
Sure.
And so in that case, that touches to the broad extent of technology and the wide um, the wide breadth of focus that I put into various topics. My personal background, though, is deeply connected to analytical computational systems. So I
Yeah.
started out as a particle physicist, where we were instrumenting a block of steel essentially to watch protons and see how long they lived. We
Right.
never did observe one die, and no one has yet observed one decay spontaneously, which is a mystery in particle physics. But the skills that I gained in that were useful in a very high tech intensive industry, magnetic recording, where measurement, instrumentation, analytical reduction and prediction and those types of things were hugely valuable
Yeah.
in shortening life cycles for design and improving outcomes and improving the operational performance of the processes and products and so on and so forth. So I came up largely through test and characterization and then product management and so on. And throughout the entire arc of my career, there's been this deep connection to using computing systems, both to take in information, to acquire them from different kinds of sense devices and observational streams, and then crunch those into insights and knowledge and turn those into actions. So I lump that all under the heading of analytical decision making,
Sure.
using a combination, right, of information sources and techniques for processing that information. And those are increasingly, of course, in the computational realm, I think, as everybody's aware. What I think about AI today is that it has become the triple H of computing technology: hype, hysteria, and hopium. And it is taking up a lot of the oxygen, if not all of the oxygen, in the computational analysis realm. And even within that sphere, the LLM generative AI paradigm has further focused the discussion to something narrower than I think we really should be talking about.
Hmm.
The reason why I think it's constrained that way is because of the Triple H factor. There's this incredible hype about what it's going to do, and the flip side of that is the hysteria of the purported existential threat that you know, general artificial intelligence may present or is presumed to present to our own kind. And then somewhere sort of in between that is what I call the hopium of, well, no, there's really good use for this. And if we only can address the problems and deal with things like hallucinations and keep refining and tweaking and improving, then we will find our way towards this great utility and benefit, right, for people. And I'm pretty skeptical about that for several reasons. One is that the cost is extraordinary. And we could go through detailed numbers, but let me just point to the example of one of the figures of the industry asking for budget funds for funds that are the budgets of small countries to go develop, the next great thing. At that point, people should really be asking themselves, is this the right path, right? If we're talking about dropping this much resource into that, what is the return? And my background focus is the return on technical innovation. When we create new capability, when we innovate new potential to reorder energy and materials in time and space, what is our purpose for that? Who are we actually benefiting by doing those things? And while there's a great deal of talk that this is going to, in the AI context, provide some unquantifiable benefit for all of humanity for all of future time, there's really no reason to claim that right now. And there are many reasons to question that and be skeptical of that. Again, the cost of doing it is itself extreme. And the costs that we're not talking about are the opportunity costs of what could we be doing with those funds if we weren't doing this.
Yeah.
And that to me is as big a problem. So let me pause there and just say that's
Well, you're taking a very, I mean, I think realistic and pragmatic approach. The other interesting thing is that as you talk about what you were doing back in the day as a physicist and with computational decision making and analytics and some of the other stuff, that is still basically within the framework of machine like AI, which is more the machine learning aspect of it. And so now we're repurposing this buzzword of AI to be something that was already being done. So a lot of stuff that is being now framed as AI is stuff we were doing for 10, 15, 20 years or even longer. And so there's aspects in with how AI is being framed that are relevant to businesses, but a lot of those aspects that we're talking about were like you said, there were things you were already doing before. So I mean, as we look at it, I like the approach of like, as far as true AI and where this buzz and this, again, that hype that you're talking about is going, it takes us in an interesting and I can see even a dangerous direction in some ways. Have you seen any technology do this though? Like in the past where, I mean, the cloud was really hyped, really big when voice over IP came out. I remember it was kind of a big deal in a new way, but I haven't seen a technology that's hit the hype and deception. I do think there are relevant applicable use cases of the framework. And like we talked about machine learning analytics and things like that with AI, but that have been done. But there's a lot of deception in this hype as well with AI in some cases. Have you seen any technology like this? You've been working with technology for years, so have you seen anything like this?
yes. The answer is yes. I have seen products, platforms that are positioned or couched or marketed as AI that I think more accurately fall into the category of algorithmic decision making, right? Sophisticated machine learning assisted decision making. Well, let me go back in time a little bit and give you an example of where that
Yeah.
is. So in my thesis work for the Sedan 2 experiment, which was looking for a thing called proton decay, but also saw neutrino interactions and really cool things like muons rocketing down through the rock overburden through the detector. The ultimate decision of what an event was in the small footprint space of our detector, not these massively intriguing cosmic ray secondaries that came through, but things like the contained events that we were looking for. The ultimate decision maker for whether an event was a particle decay or a neutrino scattering event was a physicist, trained physicists that were looking at the representation of the interaction as recomposed through the digital reconstruction of the acquisition system. So a charged particle would go through, ionization would be deposited on a bunch of sensors. That would be multiplexed into a 3D space representation along with the data of the energy and things like that. And then we would go and say, look, are these points arrayed? Does the structure of this pattern look like something that would represent this kind of interaction or that kind of interaction? So when I developed my neural network to do a very basic part of the classification and the subclassification, which was to distinguish a component of that data set into whether it was a track-like event, meaning a relatively straight series of points that said this thing kind of moved along on this linear trajectory,
Mhm.
which would be muon-like, right? Or heavy hadron-like, if it was short enough, versus a showering event, which is electrons, right, and photons, right, all decaying and emitting and so on in the detector. And so that would be more cloud-like. And my neural network was meant to basically replicate what a human physicist would do.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you could say it's artificial intelligence, right? But I would say it was assisted decision making
Sure.
by refined characterization, right? To be to be a little
Advanced
particular about
computation.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Later on, in the context of metrology of making sophisticated devices by the millions, we had a number of optical measurements. We had a number of electrical and magnetic measurements and microscopies like SEM and AFM and STM. And we would develop means of processing all that information using computers, right? Reducing the data set to a few bits that could then be subjected to analytical treatment, statistical evaluation, etc., and then say, well, it's this or that, or it's good or it's bad, it's big or it's small, right? And these types of things, and work our way towards a decision there. And in those cases, we were oftentimes led by what people would see, say, on a view screen in the factory, and go, oh, look, there's a little defect in the metal, right? Or a crack in the oxide that is going to be a problem. And then we would figure out how could we see that with a camera system or some sort of data acquisition system. And then could we analyze that? And in that way, sort of simulate or replicate the thinking of the human who would recognize the pattern or see the observation and then process it and compare it to their experience set, their knowledge base, et cetera, and come out with a decision that goes, okay, that's a void that's going to make that head no good, and we can't use it. All right, so reject it.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of experiences, right? Just to give you the context, that sort of straddle that space between computationally assisted decision making and outright thinking, given unprocessed data that isn't prepackaged, right, in some form, but is presented into a kernel, a network node, or I'm sorry, a set of weights that is able to take that in and then cast that against the model, right, that is contained within that network. So I may be getting way off in the weeds here, technically, probably.
Oh, this
and so
very interesting.
So I think that there's a lot more of that than there actually is in real AI. Even people, I don't think everybody, and maybe not enough people, appreciate that when you interact with say something like ChatGPT through the prompt system, and you are presented with this human-like dialogue, that's a show. That's a charade, right? That is designed to be presented to you as though it is a person with whom you are having discourse. And that is not how it's functioning. So right there is a deception.
Yep.
And the reason for that deception is to draw in people to its use and to condition them to thinking that they actually are interacting with a responsive intelligence, as opposed to a bunch of bits in memory that represent weights in a model against which a pattern is compared.
Yeah, it's kind of like people arguing over the puppet that the ventriloquist is using is real or not. Does that make sense?
Exactly. So I'll tell you. I mean, I don't use ChatGPT because I don't want it to suck up any ideas of mine or any information I use, and I use a certain phrasing from time to time and a characterization of things that I think is unique in many cases, and I don't want those phrases somehow coming back to me or going to other people through that system. I tested it very early on. I asked it about proton decay, and it was familiar, we'll say, of proton decay. It gave me an answer. And I would say that answer was on par with maybe a freshman or perhaps an accelerated high school senior that was doing a little bit of research project on where's the state of particle physics and what is proton decay. It was nothing more than that, and it couldn't do anything more. Since that time, I saw Copilot give me incorrect what do you call them, lottery numbers, right? So it was Powerball specifically. I had bought a Powerball ticket, I don't know, a couple months ago. It was one of the big when it was really, really huge, right? Oh, you can't win if you don't spend your $2, right? So I
Yeah.
spent my $2, and I look it up the next morning, and Copilot says one thing, and I go, why didn't it just go to the website? Why didn't Copilot just take me? Or why? Actually, I'm asking, why didn't MSN network, right, in my Edge browser,
Right.
when I typed in Powerball, why didn't it just take me to the Powerball site with the official numbers? Instead, it gave me an answer that was incorrect. So I cross-checked them, and it was incorrect. I posted that on LinkedIn, and tagged Microsoft, and they've never, of course, responded to that. I checked 2 hours later, and it was still incorrect. And then I checked later in the day, and this time I was taken to the actual Powerball website. So that's just an example and it's a tiny little example, right, of what is wrong. But those examples are all over the place, right? They are pervasive, and they are much worse. I mean, you can see people gaming Chat GPT. The 2 + 2 is 4, right? Now it's going to be 5. Okay, so what's 5 - 3? These types of things, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. So interesting question here, and it's more into your approach of business. So I know for me throughout my life, I've had different experiences from school to other projects I've taken on, and they've always influenced how I approach business. I try to learn from everything. I really do. Every experience I have, I try to learn. You have a really unique and vast experience in life. I mean, as a physicist and other things that you've done in perspective, do you take what you've learned in that arena and apply it towards how you approach technology and business? Does that make sense? Are there comparisons to it?
Absolutely. And I don't want to get into a long story about my background or my upbringing, but I should tell you that my background and upbringing are quite different from the typical American, suburbanite. Due to family issues, I was raised on a hobby farm of relatively meager means, and by my grandmother, because frankly, my parents were not very capable as parents, was the bottom line. And my grandmother was saddled with me and my sisters, raising us through the 70s in this environment where we had to raise livestock, and we had vegetable gardens that were substantial, almost an acre big.
Yeah.
And we needed to do that to make ends meet, right? To make sure we had food through the seasons, and we're making the best of the resources that she had to bring us up. So I was working on the farm from a very young age, 11, 12 years old. I was gathering eggs every morning pre-dawn in the right seasons, and bringing water to horses in 5-gallon pails of water that I could barely carry when I started, right? And a measure of my growth was, can I carry 2 5-gallon buckets of water through the snow, right? To water the horses, those kinds of things. And I hauled hay when I became a later teenager. And
The bell hay, or did you like bells, or
I rode the hay wagon on the plains, and I took it right off the baler and loaded the hay wagon and then unloaded the hay wagon into the barn, tens of thousands of bales. And I'll tell people who may be familiar, where the Vikings palatial practice facility and all that's there right now, that was where I hauled a lot of hay off. Right? Where the main highway right by there goes, that was where the major organic gardens were for the first new wave of organic gardening at the tail end of the 70s.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Great experiences.
So real hands-on work. I mean, look,
Yeah.
I've sheared sheep.
Yep.
I've banded sheep. Right? If you haven't banded sheep, you really haven't experienced the hard life, right, of farm work. Right? It is most unpleasant. And it's a very strange thing.
Yes.
And I slaughtered more chickens than I ever want to admit to. Those experiences are indelible, of course, like most others are, but they are different than most of the peers with whom I've worked through the years in that space. Now, there's others who have plenty of other stories with similar tales of hardship, right, or difficulty or challenges that they overcome. So I'm not trying to claim that I'm something unique or special in that way, but the experiences that I had did leave me with, a number of viewpoints. And I'm going to tell you that way back then, when I was carrying those buckets of water and I was gathering those eggs, and it was scary when you're 11 years old and you're out there, in the pre-dawn hours. And back then, dogs in the community would pack together and run away. We would have sheep killed on occasion.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just, totally, benign environment. There were threats that you had to brace yourself for and go through. And so all of that helped shape who I am. But while I was doing that, I used to think about time and space.
Wow.
And dimensions and things like that. And I started reading science and science fiction and those types of things as I went through junior high and into high school. And all of those were with me, and they were part of what led me to physics as my undergraduate focus anyways.
Yeah, I love that. So I grew up on a small farm in Utah myself, and I think it's interesting as I look at, aside from work ethic, right? I mean, obviously it teaches us work ethic and how to get up at early and work till like very late if necessary. But I feel like on the farm, you're always you're solving a problem always. And even if it's, stacking hay and how to stack it up as high as possible. And even as I was younger, trying to figure out how I could throw it and get and elevate even whether it was the height of the stack, the width of the stack, make it so it doesn't fall over. And all the different things that I did, it just really did this problem solve. It just created a problem solver for me. I was always solving problems. Now, I never thought a million years when I was in high school that I would be, or as a kid, I'd be in technology, because I was always working, it was always blue collar working on the farm. My first job was as a paver. And so, yeah, it's interesting that I can definitely relate with some of those experiences, not all of them, but it is interesting how that does drive our perception into business. So what about from a physics standpoint and how you approach problem solving in physics, which is in some ways more complex, or probably in most ways more complex than what we solved on the farm. And then and then apply to solving a problem in business, because as we're executives, as we're solving executive layer decisions for businesses, how does that relate?
Well, I'll just say that back then, stacking hay, you have to learn how to do it right. I did it wrong a couple of times where the stack, say in the yard, right, where we were staging it for the horses, would split down the middle, right? I'd have it collapse one side or the other. And so I didn't interlock it right. And my grandmother would say, learn your physics, right? Learn your physics, right? So presumably she was exhorting me to figure out how to do the mechanics better to make a more stable structure.
Tie it in. Yep.
And whether it was that or whether it was fence, repairing a roof, right, of a shed, right, or things like this, right, those all require sort of a level of innovativeness to solve problems using the resources largely at hand and to be able to manage those on the fly. Right? Back then, planning wasn't something that was part of my my purview. Right? I just did what had to be done and what I was being taught and guided to do to get things done. I wasn't part of the longer range view that was thinking ahead way down the road to say, well, in fall, there's going to be this concern, so I have to do this. I started to learn that in that context. So like getting the vegetables ready and making sure that we would have them in the root cellar, canning and things like this. Yep. So you learn it. Now you come fast forward to business. And like you, I wasn't really sure what my path was. I asked why a lot. I wanted to know why. I ended up picking physics as what I thought was going to be the best route to learning why. And I will say that physics doesn't tell you anything about why. It tells you a whole lot about what and how. Yeah. And that's great. But the why is for us to actually assert, to create our purpose. And to get back to your question specifically in the business context, you need to understand what is the purpose. What is it you're trying to accomplish? getting a product out the door, making sure that the performance of a given process is of a minimum sufficient level, meeting a schedule, keeping a cost down, right? These types of things. And you learn the processes of that environment. How decisions are made is ultimately the center of that process. And so I ended up gravitating to the decision-making processes. And my route to that was through the knowledge channel, turning observation and data into data and observation into information, into decision and action. So that progression. And ultimately, that's the core process of every business.
Yep.
And I would say decision making is the core process of human interaction. It's the core process of governance, right? It's the core process of family raising, right? It's the core process of planning your life, decision making. And I can't give you an answer that's sort of a one size fits all nugget of insight about it, other than to say, in the time that I've had and gone through these experiences, I focused on three core elements in these decisions, and I'm trying to build a model that I hope will have some use for people in the future for making the most of the resources we have and developing technology that drives broad prosperity. And that is people, purpose, and process.
Okay.
And who's involved? What are we doing? Who are we doing it for? Who's in, who's out? Those types of things. What are we trying to do? What is the actual purpose? Are we here to make money? Are we here to create value? Are they one and the same? Which is rarely the case, actually, these days, and increasingly disconnected, and so on. And so it's with that background that I come to the AI question and debate, and then given the non-zero risk that it does have potential capability to be catastrophic, we need to be thinking about that and prepare for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that people process, and what was the third one?
Purpose.
People, process, and purpose. I love that because there's no mention of technology. And the reason why I love that is because vendors always come in and they're hung up on their technology. And all they want to do is talk about their technology without understanding who is it for? What is the process? What's the purpose of it? Why does the business even need it? It's almost like they're just trying, not almost, it's like so many vendors are just, and we see this in AI, just trying to shove a technology down everyone's throat because that's what they have to do without any thought of how it impacts or benefits the business. And so that approach, and technology will get there. I know when I was an IT director, I did for 13 years, I was an IT director for a printing company, and the technology never came first. It was always an afterthought. What it was always first was the problem that needed to be solved, and how it was impacting the people and what was the purpose of it, what was the process that I was fixing. And then I'd go out and find the technology that could solve a problem. But everyone thinks they're going to go to you with the technology without the problem, even knowing if there's a problem there first. So I think that's a great approach to, just a great framework to approach any business. And it's a very, when you look at it, it's really how business leaders and executives are approaching the problems with that. So question now, back to AI. Do you see any applicable, and it's such a weird question because we went over, there's machine learning, the neural networks, all the stuff we've been doing, but is there any applicable AI application into business right now that you're seeing where businesses should be kind of looking at it as a use case in business? And I'm talking about the framework, of course, of what we're seeing out there. Are you seeing anything out there like that?
Yes, I think there are very worthy use cases for the thing that's being called AI, and I'll grant that within that there is some core that is AI. It's not what I think we see largely bandied about, right, and applied through the interfaces that we're working with, like ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. That's a part of it, but it's not really what it is. There's a number of people I'm connected to and follow on LinkedIn that have good ideas about this and are focused on the relationship between man and machine.
Yeah.
And what is the future of technology as we proceed on this course. And what I see and what I recognize as really potentially powerful applications from my own experience and my thoughts, and compare it to what many of these people are saying, it's in this space of knowledge management and sharing of capability, which fits the second word of my other 3-word mantra, which is innovate, transfer, transform. Innovate is creating new capabilities, doing things that you couldn't do before with energy and materials, expressing them in some new way that heretofore had not been allowed or untapped or tapped. Mm-hmm. Transfer is the exchange of knowledge around the potential and the capabilities. And one thing that struck me as I ruminated on all of this for a long time, mm-hmm. I did a lot of product transfer, process transfer overseas, East and West. As many know, that was a huge ongoing engine in corporate America for decades, mm-hmm. that we're now recognizing maybe wasn't the greatest idea and the greatest thing, and has left us in a position that isn't really where we want to be. Mm. What I recognized is that when you transfer a process, say from here to Shanghai, China, it's like wave propagation. There is no perfect transmission. There is always a junction, and at that junction, there is always a complex impedance factor that creates a reflection. So you get something back, and you get something transmitted through that junction, whether it's the cultural junction, whether it's the localized business priority function of that site versus the site you're in, within the umbrella of the business operation, right? And anything in between, you're going to have a transmission impediment, an impedance factor, mm-hmm. between you and the desired source. And if you're smart, you're paying attention to what comes back, right? The signal coming back from that junction, because that's where you learn that, oh, the way things work over here doesn't really map to over there, right? How we work with operators in this factory, in this country, doesn't quite align with how we work with operators in that factory, in that country. So that's the people element. And then there's simple stuff like, well, the power paradigm is different. It runs at a different frequency, different voltage, right? Those types of things. So you have to transfer knowledge. And in the transfer process, you need to be receptive to the reflection, right, back. And by doing that, then you can grow. And then that's what transform becomes. So,
yeah.
And I mean transform, not necessarily in the way the transformers in AI, of course, are.
Right. Now this is, God, your perception is just fascinating. And it's just thought provoking in several ways. And I'm going to even be rewatching my own episode here to be like, even like going in deeper with some of what you've talked about, because I think this is very important. So, last thoughts, what last thought on maybe directionally AI, last thought on technology, where do you see us going? I know there is some is there a way we recover, we get good out of it? Does it just, I don't see it going away, but where do we go from here?
Well, you talked about a little earlier about people knowing what they're about, right? And what the value of their innovation is, right? And it's not just the technology.
Sure.
And having worked with the startup community for over 10 years in depth now, and serving on a volunteer as a accelerator board and coaching and mentoring a number of CEOs. I think it's pretty well understood that the number one challenge that a lot of technical founders and entrepreneurs face is they get caught up in the technology and all the oohs and ahs about it, and lose sight of what is its real utility and why do people actually want it, right? What are you really selling, and what is the technology doing? So that comes back to this purpose thing. And so I'm gonna focus on two things right now, and preface it by saying the process, right? The process by which we're being driven forward around these technologies is woefully out of control. It's woefully out of control because we have egregious asymmetries and inequities in the participation and decision-making process. A part of that's of our own making, right? I'm going to leave that aside for a minute. Come back to people and purpose. So this use and all-consuming pursuit of AI, what is it we are really looking for? And it's pretty evident that in some people's mind, they want to transcend people. They want to obsolete people in some sense. And I ask myself, what would a world look like if we had nothing for people to do and they were just idly? Imagine that AI was this fabulously successful thing. We weren't at risk of any kind of existential threats, that it was all benign automata with all these wonderful features, and they served as grapes while we sat on the lounge, right? And what does that world look like? Well, there was a movie, right? That was a animated movie, right? That showed what happens if people don't really have much purpose and they don't have a lot to do. The history is that we are not going to aspire to be greater beings. And we are not going to strive to be greater beings if all of our challenges are suddenly solved and taken away. Right. Here's an example. This mad pursuit of automated driving. I love to drive. I have loved to drive since before I had a license, and taking road trips and day trips and seeing things is a part of life's pleasures. Now, if I put in a package my greenhouse imprint of burning gas to do that, right, and say, okay, I can substitute that with lower footprint solutions like an EV, then I come back to say, why would I want a machine to do this for me? And then I ask myself, why would we want a machine to do that for millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of individuals all at once, each in their single container? You're taking the pleasure out of the driving. You're taking the labor and the boredom and maybe potentially some of the risk out of driving. But you're not really solving the problem, right? Of the congestion, the contention, the saturation, right, of the resource that's the roads and all these things. So maybe we should be focusing on intelligent driving systems for multi-person vehicles, buses, trains. The trucks for transportation have some value, but again, why are we in such a hurry to make people unnecessary? And who's doing that? And to me, this gets down to something that traces back to our roots in the farm, and maybe isn't as clear to some folks who don't share those experiences. Is that's what makes life good. Those are the good things about life. To have a life of idle ease, I think, is only attractive to a very few people. And I think that those very few people have other problems. Now, I want to make sure that there isn't misery and drudgery and oppression and subjugation like mineral mining. Or digging through plastic, mountains of plastic waste and all that stuff. And I think that's what we should be putting much more focus on. And that's my mantra, or my tagline, or my hashtag Make Green Work that's on my profile on LinkedIn, is about we've sort of set ourselves up to think that business is this process of taking what we can get, right, by churning the pot and representing value, whether or not it is real value, instead of saying, let's just go make the place better for everyone. And that should be a good thing to do. So, anyways, probably not the cleanest, clearest answer you're looking for, but that's
it's a great answer, and it really talks about the need for us to keep our humanity. And I've had this thought of where everyone's scared that machines are going to take over the world in the way Terminators do. And maybe that's sci-fi-ish, maybe it's out there, but I think what you're hitting on, and to me is a bigger concern, is that humans are going to become more machine-like, meaning start to lose their humanity and start to do things autonomously without, again, all those things that make us human, that make life enjoyable, that make things enjoyable. And I think human, like you said, I think there are a few people that want that, but overall I think humans enjoy the human experience to the for the most part. Let's just use it to eliminate the I agree, eliminate, the bad things, the things that are crushing humanity out there, if there is a use case for it. So no, I absolutely, that's just a profound thought. So it's
Well,
great.
so I have to tag on to that, that we have a serious problem, because there are plenty of people who are using these tools for the opposite. I mean,
Yeah.
this tech bro that runs this company, Anduril, right, who celebrates his ability to create weapons of incredible destruction and horror, and names his company right after a an icon, right, in a story that's beloved by tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people,
Hmm.
right, is an example of that. Our institutions like Harvard and MIT and other
Yep.
Ivy League schools, Stanford, right, are driving the front end of human subjugation through surveillance. It is a problem. It is a disaster. And I will say it here for your audience, people who work in that, I have nothing but contempt for.
Yeah. We need to maintain freedom. I mean, across the board, and autonomy.
Well, maintaining freedom with defensive measures is one thing, right?
Yeah.
Doing proactive application that reduces people to bits, and in this case, literally is reducing them to bits to characterize them, control them, manipulate them, direct them, and subjugate them. That is the thing that we all should be fighting against.
Yep. And that's the word, the subjugate. That's the word that I'm talking when I talk about freedom, is to avoid that. Garrick, unbelievable insights. I mean, I absolutely, like, what a pleasure having you on as a
Thank you.
guest, and just maybe again, I know we'll definitely be collaborating together, but thank you so much for jumping on with me.
Well, I'm glad to have the time with you, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thanks, Garrick.